When I first stepped into that lecture hall, I didn't think much about who would be leading the course. I was just a graduate assistant, assigned to help with grading, organizing, and the occasional tutoring session. It was work, plain and simple. But then she walked in. She wasn't like the professors I'd known before. There was no nervous shuffling of notes, no rushed setup. She entered the room with the kind of composure that silenced the chatter before she even spoke. Her heels clicked softly against the floor, her presence commanding yet unforced, as if the room simply adjusted itself around her. She set her books down, adjusted her glasses, and with one steady glance across the hall, she had everyone's attention, mine most of all. In class, she was Mississippi professional. Sharp. Her voice carried a certain rhythm, firm when guiding discussions, soft but unwavering when she wanted students to think deeper. There was elegance in her restraint, in the way she allowed silence to linger just long enough before someone nervously filled it with an answer. I should have been focused on my role, but I found myself studying the way she held herself, the way her hand would rest lightly on the podium, her pen tapping in a subtle rhythm, the way she smiled. Not often, but when she did, it transformed her entirely, adding warmth to the cool precision of her presence. I thought she didn't notice me. After all, I was just another assistant, one of many she'd probably worked with over the years. But I was wrong. One evening, after most of the students had cleared out, I stayed behind to gather stray papers and stack them neatly for her. She was at her desk, scribbling notes in the margins of a book. Without looking up, she asked, "You don't have to stay so late, you know." I hesitated, then replied, "I don't mind. I'd rather finish it now than leave it for tomorrow." She glanced up then, and for the first time, her expression shifted from professor to something else, something softer. Her smile wasn't the professional kind she wore in front of a room full of students. It was smaller, almost personal. "You're thorough," she said. "That's rare these days." The compliment was simple, but it hit harder than I expected. My face warmed, and I quickly ducked my head, pretending to focus on the papers. When I finally handed her the neat stack, her fingers brushed against mine as she took them. Just a fleeting touch, accidental perhaps, but enough to leave a spark buzzing beneath my skin. She noticed. I could tell by the way her lips curved, just slightly, before she looked back down at her notes. That was the moment I realized this was not going to be like any other assignment I'd ever taken on, because she wasn't just Mississippi, not to me. The first time we truly spoke outside of class, the building was almost empty. Evening had settled in, the kind of stillness that makes every sound feel sharper. The hum of fluorescent lights, the faint echo of footsteps on the linoleum floors. I had been helping her carry boxes of old journals and reference books from the lecture hall back to her office. She insisted she could handle them herself, but the boxes were heavy, and it felt natural to take the weight from her hands. "Stubborn," she teased softly as we made our way down the quiet corridor. "You remind me of myself at your age." The remark startled me, not because of what she said, but because of the warmth in her voice when she said it. Up until then, I had only known her lecture hall tone, crisp, deliberate, measured. This was different. This was human. Her office was tucked at the end of the hall. She pushed the door open with her shoulder, and I followed her inside. It was nothing like the sterile classrooms I was used to. Her shelves were crowded with well-worn books, spines creased from years of use. A small lamp cast a pool of warm light across her desk, softening the edges of the room. There was a plant in the corner, a faded scarf draped over the back of her chair. Little touches that made it feel less like an office and more like a lived-in space. "Set them there," she said, pointing to a low table. As I placed the box down, I noticed the faint scent of her perfume lingering in the air, something understated but elegant, a fragrance that seemed to fit her perfectly. She lowered herself into her chair, leaning back with a sigh. "Do you ever get tired of these walls?" she asked suddenly, glancing at the stacks of paper surrounding her. The question caught me off guard. "I suppose so," I admitted, "but I don't think I've spent nearly as much time inside them as you have." Her laugh was soft, genuine, the kind that carried a hint of weariness. True, sometimes I wonder if I'll ever know what it feels like to leave all this behind, even for a little while. The work doesn't end, it just rearranges itself. I sat down in the chair across from her, hesitant but curious. So what do you do when you're not here? She tilted her head, studying me with amused eyes. You mean when I'm not a professor? Yes, I said quickly, realizing how it sounded. I mean, what do you enjoy outside of all this? For a moment, she looked surprised by the question, as though it had been a long time since anyone had asked her something so simple. Then her expression softened. I read, she said, but not what you'd expect. Not theories or academic journals. Novels. Stories. I like getting lost in them. I like to travel too, though it's been a while. And I enjoy cooking, though I don't often have anyone to cook for these days. Her words hung in the air, tinged with something unspoken. Vulnerability, maybe. Loneliness, carefully wrapped in a casual tone. And in that moment, I didn't see the professor who stood at the front of a lecture hall. I saw a woman with her own quiet battles, her own private joys and disappointments. I found myself smiling. You make it sound almost ordinary. She leaned forward slightly, her elbow resting on the desk, eyes glinting with amusement. And you sound surprised. Maybe I am, I admitted. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was heavy, yes, but in a way that felt meaningful. As if both of us sensed the line between roles shifting just slightly. When I finally stood to leave, she thanked me for helping. But her voice carried that same warmth I had heard earlier in the hallway. The warmth that would stay with me long after I stepped out into the night air. And for the first time, I wondered what other parts of her I hadn't seen yet. From the very beginning, I knew she carried herself differently inside the classroom than outside of it. In front of 30 students, she was flawless, sharp lines, crisp voice, posture that didn't bend under anyone's gaze. She wore her professionalism like a second skin, and every word she spoke was deliberate. To me, she seemed untouchable in those moments, as though she belonged to another world entirely. But then there were the smaller moments, the ones that slipped through the cracks when no one else was paying attention. Like the way her eyes would flicker toward me if I stayed standing at the side of the room a little too long, as though checking to see if I was paying attention not to her words, but to her. Or how she would pause ever so slightly when handing me papers, her fingers brushing mine with what felt like intention, or maybe just coincidence. I kept telling myself it was nothing, that I was imagining it, until one afternoon, when the line between professional and something else blurred just a little too much to ignore. Class had ended, students were filing out, and I lingered near the front, waiting for her to finish answering a question from a straggler. When a student finally left, she looked up at me with a smile that was different from the one she wore moments ago. "Still here?" she asked. "I thought I'd help tidy up," I said, motioning toward the scattered handouts. She gave a small laugh. "You really don't know how to stand still, do you?" I shrugged, trying to hide the fact that her attention made me nervous. She walked over, gathering a few papers, and then, almost out of nowhere, she said lightly, almost in a whisper, in class, you really should call me Mississippi." The words shouldn't have meant anything. That was the rule. Respect, formality, professionalism. But then she leaned just slightly closer, her voice lowering, laced with something teasing. "But outside of class, you can call me anything you want." For a moment, I forgot how to breathe. I glanced at her, searching for the joke, the hint of irony. But she only tilted her head, watching me with eyes that seemed to sparkle with amusement. The heat rushed to my face, betraying me completely. She noticed. Of course she did. Her lips curved into a knowing smile. "You're blushing," she teased softly, and the sound of her laughter seemed to echo louder than the empty classroom around us. I scrambled for words, any words, but they slipped away. All I could manage was a nervous chuckle, fumbling with the stack of papers in my hands. Her hand reached out then, brushing mine as she took a folder from me. It was a small touch, innocent enough, but her fingers lingered a second too long. Long enough for me to feel the warmth of her skin against mine. Long enough for the air between us to feel charged. And just as quickly, she pulled back, her composure sliding back into place as though nothing had happened. But I knew something had shifted, because she had drawn the line herself. Missing class, but outside of it, anything I want. And suddenly, every look, every word, every accidental touch seemed less accidental. It was late again, too late, probably, for either of us to still be in the building. The corridors were empty, lights dimmed except for a few buzzing fixtures overhead. Her office glowed faintly at the end of the hall, the door cracked open, spilling a warm yellow light into the dark. I had stopped by to drop off some notes, but when I saw her still at her desk, I hesitated. She was hunched slightly, glasses resting low on her nose, a mug of coffee cooling beside her. For once, she didn't look polished or composed. She just looked tired. I knocked gently on the frame. She looked up, startled, and then smiled faintly when she saw me. "You're still here. I could ask you the same thing," I said, stepping inside. She gave a soft laugh and rubbed her temples. "Touché. I suppose I lose track of time." I noticed then how different she seemed without the classroom around her. Her voice lacked its usual sharpness. Her hair had slipped from its neat style, falling in loose strands around her face. She wasn't Professor in that moment. She was just her. I set the papers down and hesitated. "You look like you need a break." "Do I?" she asked, almost amused. She leaned back in her chair and sighed, staring at the ceiling. "It's always the same. Deadlines, evaluations, expectations. Everyone assumes I've got it together all the time. And most of the time, I can pretend I do. But some nights, her voice trailed off. There was a pause, not awkward but heavy. I found myself sitting across from her without thinking. "What about you?" she asked suddenly, tilting her head. "You're always so steady. Don't you ever feel overwhelmed?" The question surprised me. I almost laughed. "Steady? That's not how I describe myself." She arched a brow. "No? Then how would you?" I hesitated, then admitted quietly, unsure most of the time. Like I'm supposed to have things figured out by now, but I don't. I'm still finding my footing, I guess. Her eyes softened, studying me in a way that felt too intimate, too knowing. She leaned forward, resting her elbow on the desk, chin on her hand. "You're steadier than you think," she said. "Maybe you don't see it, but I do." I felt my chest tighten at her words. Not because of what she said, but because of the way she said it. Gentle, certain, as if she saw something in me I had never allowed myself to believe. Her hand drifted across the desk, stopping just short of mine. Then, almost without hesitation, her fingers brushed against the back of my hand. Light, tentative, but deliberate. The touch was small, but it carried a weight that left me motionless. My heart pounded. She didn't pull away. Instead, she let her hand rest there, her thumb tracing the edge of my knuckles just once before retreating, as if reminding herself of the line she wasn't supposed to cross. The silence that followed was thick with unspoken things. And I knew this wasn't just admiration anymore. It wasn't just respect or curiosity. It was something deeper, something neither of us had planned for. By now, staying late in her office had become almost routine. What started as me helping organize papers or carrying boxes had turned into long evenings surrounded by books, empty coffee cups, and quiet conversation. The kind of time that didn't feel like work anymore. I began to notice how natural it felt to be near her, how easy it was to slip into her presence, as though the space between us was meant to be filled. One evening, the sky outside her office windows was already dark, the street lamps casting faint shadows across the campus. She had a stack of essays spread across her desk, red pen in hand, her glasses perched low. I sat beside her, working through a smaller pile she had passed to me. The silence wasn't empty. It carried a steady rhythm. The scratching of pens, the occasional rustle of paper, the soft clink of mugs against the desk. But underneath it, there was something else, something unspoken. At one point, She reached for a paper at the same time I did. Our hands collided, fingers brushing. I froze, and so did she. Her eyes lifted to mine, and for a heartbeat too long, neither of us moved. There was no teasing this time, no laugh to break the tension. Just her gaze, steady, searching, holding me in place. I could see the faint lines near her eyes, the curve of her lips as they parted slightly, as if she wanted to say something but thought better of it. My breath caught, and I realized just how close we were. I leaned in just a little, not even enough to close the space, but enough that I could feel the warmth of her. The faint perfume she wore, subtle and elegant, wrapped around me like a secret I wasn't supposed to know. Her hand didn't move away. Instead, her fingers shifted just slightly, as though they wanted to stay there, tangled with mine. Then, almost as quickly, she leaned back, reclaiming her hand. She smiled, soft and controlled, but her voice betrayed her. It was quieter than usual when she said, "You should be careful. Someone might think you're distracted." I managed a nervous laugh, though my heart was still racing. Maybe I am. Her eyes lingered on me for a moment longer before she turned back to her papers, her composure sliding back into place. But the air in the room had shifted. We both felt it. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. Words became harder to find, every movement sharper in my awareness. When she leaned across me to reach another stack of essays, her sleeve brushed against mine, her hair falling forward so close I could almost feel it graze my cheek. It would have been so easy in that moment to close the gap, to let the pull between us take over. But we didn't. Instead, we sat there in that quiet, charged space, pretending to work while both of us carried the weight of something unspoken, something we knew we couldn't ignore much longer. The night it happened, the campus was quieter than usual. Rain tapped softly against the windows, the kind of steady rhythm that made the whole building feel hushed. We had been working late again, surrounded by half-graded papers and the soft hum of her desk lamp. I told myself it was routine by now. I told myself I was used to these evenings, used to her nearness. But the truth was, every time I walked into her office, I carried the same nervous anticipation, wondering if tonight would feel different. And this night it did. She leaned back in her chair, setting her pen down with a sigh. "That's enough for today," she said, rubbing the bridge of her nose. "I think my eyes are ready to give out." I smiled, closing the folder in front of me. "You push yourself too hard." Her lips curved into a faint smile. "You sound like someone who knows me better than most." The words hung in the air, heavier than she intended, perhaps. She seemed to notice it too, because she stood up quickly, gathering her scarf from the chair. "Come on," she said softly. "I'll walk you out." The hallway was dark, only a few overhead lights flickering on as we passed. Our footsteps echoed, slow and unhurried. When we reached the doors, she stopped, turned to face me. "Thank you," she said, her voice low, "for staying. For everything, really." I shook my head. "You don't need to thank me. I want to be here." Her eyes lingered on mine, then, studying me in that searching way of hers, as though weighing something unspoken. I felt the air shift between us, charged, expectant. She stepped closer, her hand brushing down the sleeve of my jacket, as if smoothing a crease that wasn't there. The touch was light, deliberate, her fingers resting for just a moment too long. "You don't have to be so nervous with me," she whispered. Her voice, soft, reassuring, almost intimate, sent a rush of warmth through me. My throat tightened, words caught somewhere between my chest and my lips. Before I could respond, she leaned in, slowly, deliberately. Her cheek brushed mine, the faintest graze of skin against skin. And then, just at the corner of my mouth, she pressed a lingering kiss. Not hurried, not hesitant, gentle, certain. My breath caught. The world seemed to narrow to that single point of contact, the warmth of her lips, the steadiness of her hand still resting on my arm. When she pulled back, she didn't look away. Her eyes held mine, her expression soft but unguarded in a way I had never seen before. Neither of us spoke. We didn't need to. The silence between us was full, charged with the truth we had both been circling for so long. Something had changed, irreversibly. And though the line we had tiptoed around for weeks was finally crossed, it didn't feel wrong. It felt inevitable. After that night, everything felt different. Not because the world around us had changed, but because we had. The air between us carried a new weight, a quiet certainty that couldn't be unspoken. And yet, the next day, she still walked into class with the same composure. She still stood at the podium, commanding respect, her voice clear and steady. To everyone else, nothing was out of the ordinary. But I noticed a difference. The way her eyes lingered on mine for just a fraction longer than they should. The way her smile softened when no one else could see. We didn't need words to acknowledge it. We both knew. That evening, I found myself back in her office, the door closed against the world outside. The desk lamp cast its familiar pool of warm light, papers scattered across the surface, though neither of us seemed concerned about them anymore. I sat close to her, closer than before, without hesitation this time. Our chairs nearly touched, the space between us deliberately gone. Her hand rested on the arm of my chair, fingers just within reach of mine. Without thinking, I slid my hand over hers. She didn't pull away. Instead, her fingers turned, curling to fit perfectly with mine. For a long moment, we sat like that, saying nothing, just listening to the quiet hum of the lamp and the faint patter of rain against the windows. She broke the silence first, her voice soft but certain. In class, I'll always be Mississippi. That's the role, the title, the mask, if you want to call it that. I glanced at her, searching her face. There was no hesitation in her eyes, only honesty. But here, she continued, squeezing my hand gently, with you, I don't need a title. Her words settled into me like an anchor, grounding me in a way I hadn't expected. It wasn't just about desire or the thrill of crossing a forbidden line. It was about something steadier, something real. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Then here, I whispered back, I don't want you to be anyone but yourself. She smiled then, not the professional smile, not the polite curve of lips she wore for students. This was different, softer, vulnerable. I leaned toward her, and this time there was no hesitation, no retreat. Our foreheads touched lightly, a small gesture that carried more weight than words ever could. I felt her hand tighten in mine, steady and warm, and for a moment, the rest of the world disappeared. No lecturos, no taitas, no lines we weren't supposed to cross. Just her, just me, just the quiet truth that somehow, against every expectation, we had found each other. And as I sat there beside her, fingers entwined, I realized something that both terrified me and gave me peace. This wasn't the end of our story. It was the beginning.